This is Cybersecurity Distilled with Andy Bennett.
Thank you for joining us for the next episode of Cybersecurity Distilled, a show designed to break down the complex problems, concepts, and technologies facing our cybersecurity professionals today while exploring the complex flavors of our favorite distilled spirits. I'm your host, Andy Bennett, and in my day job, I'm the CISO of Apollo Information Systems, and this is a production of Apollo Information Systems. With me today is my friend Jacob Stauffer, who has been around the block, which is part of what we're going to talk about. Jacob, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks for coming, man. When I asked, you answered exactly correctly, right? Except this is Cybersecurity Distilled, and I said, "Hey, do you drink?" And you don't have to tell everybody what your actual response was, but it was a yes. And he's holding up a glass for anybody who is watching or not watching, but just listening. And so, what are you drinking today?
Actually, today I'm going to hold up this bottle here, and this is actually a Yamazaki single malt 12-year. It's very hard to find in the United States, but I was very fortunate last night. My wife showed up after she got off of work. My very pregnant wife, keep in mind, showed back up because she was looking for a gift for her boss, and saw this and just like, oh, I'm going to get it for my husband. So
Fantastic. Outstanding. Well, I last week I got to drink this, which was the Balvenie 21, nice. But I only had a little left, and now it is gone. So this week we're going to move on to my parents. My parents moved out of their house, and in moving them, of course, their liquor cabinet also had to move. And in the back of it, I found a bottle of Glenfiddich 15 that has been sitting around for who knows how long, because the box it was in was literally sun faded, and it wasn't near a window. So we're gonna experiment with this today.
Oh,
and I figured because I knew we'd be talking about some of your stories and where you've come from, that something from the back of the shelf might be appropriate.
Yeah, that's aged an additional 15 years on top of the 15 years it was in the barrel. So just keep that in mind.
That's right. That's right. So where should we start? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and where you do it. That way you get a little plug.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. So how did I get started in cybersecurity? First of all, my name is Jacob Stauffer. I am the Director of Operations for Coherent CYBER. We primarily focus on incident response, digital forensic investigations, and also threat hunting. We do some consulting, but really just focus on those three main topics. I'm also an adjunct professor at UTSA. I teach digital forensic analysis. And so how did I get started in cybersecurity? It's actually an interesting story. I was in Dallas trying to finish up my computer engineering degree, and I felt like there was something missing. And at the time, I was working for a company called Global Tech Solutions. It's no longer around. They actually create software that was designed specifically to take information from the stock market and foreign exchange markets and whatnot, and kind of predict models to where you can go get in, make some money, and then ultimately get out. And so one of my roles, because I was a full-time student at the time, was I worked technical support. I worked night shift technical support from 6 to 1 a.m. So, but at this time, I had met a few individuals. I called them the Motley Crew, because they were kind of on the dark side of cybersecurity, or what we would consider dark side of cybersecurity now. Keep in mind, this was 2004, 2005. So
the good old days is what I called them.
Yeah, the quiet days where, I mean, when you look at all the CVEs, when you look at like how many CVEs were done in 2012 versus what it is nowadays, it's absolutely ridiculous. So call those the dark days. But yeah, so I met these three individuals, and I won't name them specifically, but they probably know exactly who they are. And these guys were they were compromising boxes. They were getting on there. They were seeing what they can do with them. And a few of them had mentioned this program. It's called the CyberCore program, and that they were really interested in doing that. And so I started doing a little bit of my research. Actually applied and got in within 24 hours, which blew my mind. An individual by the name of Sujit Shenoy called me personally. He was the director of the program at the University of Tulsa at the time, and said, "Hey, are you interested? Can you come now?" And I told him, "I can't come now, but I can definitely come during the spring semester." And he's like, "Okay, fine, let's go." So went there, focused in digital forensics, got my master's in computer science with a focus in digital forensics. Then shortly before I graduated, I got my first job, and my first job was evaluating e-voting systems. At the time, there was a lot of controversy. This is right around 2004 elections, when there were a lot of people that were saying that elections were compromised, especially in a small little place called Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Mm-hmm. So needless to say, as a response to that, we ended up getting the California Secretary of State's office at the time was Deborah Bowen. She went ahead and mandated that all the voting systems in her state be formally evaluated for security flaws, and they would all have to undergo this before they would be able to be at least sold in her state. And so, and I will say this, the voting system vendors were pissed about this. I mean, at no point in time did they ever have to worry about security. For them, it's a line item that just takes from their bottom line. So they were not very happy about this whatsoever.
Turns out that argument's not new, right?
No, absolutely not. So actually, I've got a nice little talk with a client tomorrow regarding that very thing about voting system vendors kind of bullying people around. So, but yeah. So anyway, my very first job was to break into the Diebold system, one of the Diebold systems, and one of the Hart InterCivic systems, find vulnerabilities and see if I can compromise an election. And so I did that for, actually, I'm continuing to do that as far as evaluations are concerned. But then once I graduated, I had to, so as part of the CyberCore program.
So there's people screaming right now, everywhere where, the 5 places where this is being listened to, going, were you able to do it?
Was I able to do it? The simple answer is yes. The
longer answer is they fixed it some, right?
Okay.
Yeah. That meme where they also, then they go, right?
Right. And the answer, the short answer is kind of. So, yeah.
I'm leading the witness. I already know the answers. I'm just leading the witness because it's important.
Exactly. The sad thing is, and I've actually been quoted on this a couple times, where voting systems are like, or especially a lot of these voting system vendors, what they end up doing is they end up purchasing a bunch of different companies, and then they just kind of smash all this stuff together without understanding or rewriting things. And it's like Frankenstein's monster. I mean, we had one, we did an evaluation on one system where it literally had a little bit of COBOL code. It had a little bit of C++ code. It had some JavaScript in it. And I mean, it was all over the place when it comes to our evaluations. So our source code team had a fun time with that one. So the ones that I always get a kick out of is the ones or the vendors that write their code in either C# or Java, because effectively you can reverse engineer that bytecode back into like the original English, or however you wrote it. So unless they actually used an obfuscator before they compiled it, then I was able to completely read everything that they wrote and able to use some of their code against them.
We've seen similar issues with nation state cyber weapons, where they didn't actually obfuscate properly, whether intentionally or otherwise. And for example, the word Beetlejuice pops out.
Yep.
Which is not exactly it's not exactly something that just pops out of every single culture on the planet. especially if you say it 3 times. So it does sound cool. So
sounds like a statically statically compiled password or something that they put in there.
Right.
I'd be surprised.
I'm making a Stuxnet joke, but
Beetlejuice.
That's
all of a sudden
right.
it shows up on your network. Oh crap.
Knock on wood right now. Yeah. So it's funny that you describe the mushing together of these technologies as you're describing that. If it, out of context, if we were to just take that out of context, it would be the same as how most companies, many companies, I won't say most, many companies do M&A work. It's the same thing, right? They just kind of mush these companies together without thinking about how they fit together and how the processes should be unified. And later on, they're like, why aren't we secure?
Yep. And that's and that's where threat hunting came into play. But that's another story.
Well, we'll get to lots of stories, hopefully. So you said something that made me think of a question. So I even wrote it down to make sure I didn't forget. Is what's your best quote? What's the best quote you've ever been quoted in the media? Funny or impactful?
Not necessarily in the media. What is the? I would probably say the Frankenstein monster that comes up. I mean, I will get phone calls from various media outlets and even lawyers that are saying, "Hey, look, we're either doing a story or we're representing a client," and the one quote that just continues to come up is Frankenstein's monster. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And so I think that's
so that's yours.
Funny one, yeah. Another funny quote that was not in the media that to this day continues to get me notoriety is one of the squadrons I used to work for, the 33rd Network Warfare Squadron. We met a brand new our brand new commander. We're sitting down, getting to meet her and everything, and she's trying to figure out who we are and whatnot. And she's a very personal individual. She wants to know like we are family and whatnot. And at this time, I was not married. I didn't have any kids and so on and so forth. And so she gets to me, starts asking me what I'd like to do and whatnot. She's like, "So you have any kids?" I'm just like, "Yep, not that I know of." So that was not
that I know of. There you go.
Yeah, even my friends, my captain friends are just like, "Oh my God, here we go." So.
Well, let's see. My favorite. I don't know that it ever got a whole lot of traction or anything, but it did get published, and you could go find it. Is I got one of those helper reporter outs or something like that, and I was feeling a little punchy that day, so I smushed together Eisenhower and Mike Tyson, and so it was Eisenhower's essentially. I'm going to paraphrase Eisenhower's quote of "The plan is useless. The planning is what's important." And Tyson's "everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face," right? And I smushed them together to describe what makes a good incident responder. And that one was that's my favorite. I when they published it, I couldn't believe it got published.
That's awesome, actually.
Go find it. You're gonna like it.
Yeah, the one that the one that my students hate, actually. As I said, I was an adjunct professor, or I am an adjunct professor, and I take a very different approach to teaching. I tried and of course, I teach more of the junior senior level than the freshman and sophomore level. And so, at this point in time, you should know how to think, right? Because Einstein had said about education that and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have the thing in front of me, but essentially the point or the gist of it was education is not to teach you like the technical aspects of it, it's to teach you how to think, right?
Yep.
And I always open up with that, and along the way I always have students, especially online students, are just like, "Well, I taught myself how to learn," and I'm just like, "Well, that's the whole point. You're here to learn not just of what I'm going to teach you, but also how to think as well." So
I was a college professor for a very long time, or at least it feels like a very long time. There's a lot of people who do it a lot longer than I did. And that was the number one thing. I hate to break it to every college student out there who thinks they're going to come out of their college degree with the exact skills they need for their profession. What you come out with is the mindset for your profession. The skills will change. Even in accounting, the skills change because the laws change. Every single professional field that is worth doing has, and which is arguably all of them. I'm not disparaging any field here. That's for the second drink. The field will change and evolve, and it's more important that you understand the fundamentals. Those are always important, but the specifics of the skills will evolve over time, and it's important that you understand the mindset required to be productive and move on with that, not have the skills to be functional on day one. That's your job. Our job as faculty, the faculty at every university, their job is to prepare you to be able to do that. All right. So soapbox over, have a drink.
Yeah, I always get a kick out of the comments and say, I spent $3,000 for the instructor to pretty much teach me how to Google. And I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, this is part of the job. And so it's always a rather enjoyable with those students. My
favorite one was a graduate class where they got really upset. One person, not they. I don't know who said it or anything, because reviews are anonymous, of course. And so my teaching reviews came back and they said, I cannot believe we had to do peer review in a graduate course. I'm like, wait a second, what? What? Because how I would do it is I would give them all their topics. I would have them write their works. I would come up with a very prescriptive grading rubric to make sure that there was no like getting around the grading criteria, right? And to give people an out in case somebody actually failed. It's grad school, so nobody should actually fail. They presumably already had the skills to be there. And so, yeah, they were just so frustrated that I didn't spend all my time grading each and every one of their papers that are on the same topic, instead of letting them learn from each other by giving them different topics and rubrics to grade against. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I've so I recently started a piece. So our class is mainly labs and quizzes and whatnot. And so one of the things that I've recently introduced is this concept of a lab report. You would think that in forensic investigations, that you would have to write a report, right? Right. And so I introduced this concept, and I gave them the template, I gave them everything, and then I said, okay, go be successful. And you'd be surprised how many don't like that idea. They just want to do the lab and get it over with, and not have to do additional writing. It's like, give me an executive summary. Tell me what you have done, because you're going to have to do this later on. Give me your conclusions. Okay. And what's the difference between a hacker and a pen tester, Jacob? A hacker is a much more broad term that everybody uses nowadays for everything from I just fixed my laundry, my washing machine out here, so I'm now a hacker. Life hacker. Yeah, life hacker. Where a penetration tester, that's a much different career sets. That's a much different career tools and everything else to that fact. So see my joke there that you just went way past was documentation. The difference is documentation. No, absolutely. Yeah. Because you're just documents everything. That's right. Pen testers have to produce reports. Pen testers have to document. Pen testers have to document so they stay out of jail. Let me just throw that down. Yep. Okay. Because it's easy to get accused of doing something you either did or didn't do. And if you don't have your documentation in order and you did do the thing, you could go to jail. And if you don't have your documentation in order and you can't show with confidence what it is you actually did, like keep the logging on in your system while you're doing your work. Save the logs off when you're done doing your work so you can show what all you were doing. If you don't do those things, you could end up in jail. Pen testing is one of those places where if you don't do it right, you committed a crime. Yeah, I mean, you have to have authorization, right? And you know what? You bring up a very good point, and I got to find a way of actually adding this on to our forensic investigations, because one of the most and very important things about a forensic investigation is authorization to conduct that investigation. And I got to find, I mean, my students are going to find this, and they're going to be, my future students are going to find this, and I'm just like, man, Andy, you are the one that screwed us over on this one. You're the reason why I lost 25 points, because I didn't contact the instructor for the subpoena or the warrant or something else to that fact. So good on you. You're welcome. Enjoy. That's going to be fun. That's going to be a very interesting conversation. Cheers. Thank you, sir. I'm holding my glass up, by the way. I was too. I have to get better at describing what I'm doing because it's a video. It's not all video format. So
Yeah, your producer made a point of just like, hey, anytime you show something in the camera, make sure you let them know what you're holding up. So,
and I fail miserably, but I've got Jacob here to back me up here.
I'm gonna try to.
I appreciate that. So let's see. I did have some other topics, and I told you we would wander, and we already have. And I do want to circle back to where you left off in story time. But I had a topic I wanted to make sure we do get to because I have talked to you before, and I know we can talk for a long time. So, how important do you think specialization is in cybersecurity, in getting a job, in starting your career versus ending your career? What is the importance and role of specialization in our industry?
I think specialization it's required. I mean, so when I look at, so one of the things that I also used to do is, and still do to this day to a certain limited capacity, is teach middle school and high school students cybersecurity. And I really see that breaking into a cybersecurity role, you're going to know generalized topics and whatnot. You may start out in a role where you're installing security software. You may be a low-level analyst at the time and whatnot, maybe even a SOC analyst, just seeing alerts, what we call in the Air Force the scope dope, somebody who is just reading alerts as they come through and doing some analysis. But I mean, if you want to get better at your job, if you want to end up making a lot more money. I mean, I think the average salary for somebody who has a Security Plus certification is anywhere between $40,000 and $70,000, $40,000 to $80,000 a year, which is a great salary, by the way, especially if you were a high school student breaking into the arena and you have that certification and you don't have any formal college experience. That's fantastic. But I mean, if you want to get into those six figures, if you want to get into $150,000, $160,000, $170,000 a year, you have to specialize. And so there are a bunch of different specialties out there in the cybersecurity realm. I mean, take a look at me in my case where I started in forensics. We were doing a lot of not just forensic investigations, but then we ended up getting into malware reverse engineering. So those are both big specialties there. Obviously threat management. And so if you're going to do vulnerability assessments, what we call blue team or purple team vulnerability assessments, that's always a fantastic a place to get into. Penetration testing or even exploitation development. And by the way, those are not the same thing. One may do the other. So a penetration tester may be an exploit writer as well. But when I actually was talking to somebody on LinkedIn about this, and I mentioned to him that exploitation development, you're just writing code to exploit a vulnerability. You have to know how to implement that. You have to know how to use that. And how you do that is become a red teamer, become somebody who knows how to break into things, somebody who knows how to subvert and get around different defenses and whatnot. But then also somebody who knows how to get out when the going is getting good. So I 100% think that that specialization is not only important, but it's also needed, especially in this career field.
So let's zero in on red team real quick. What's the best starting point for somebody who's an aspiring red teamer or pen tester? Because those two get conflated a lot before you're in. And they also have, in my opinion, somewhat similar entry points, even though the terminal destination is not the same.
Yeah. So when I hear the term penetration tester versus red teamer, they're actually two different thought processes. When I think of a penetration tester, those are individuals that are looking to get into a specific network and see how far they can get with respect to what data they can get out as far as their objectives that they're trying to do. A red teamer is a lot more broad. I think of those individuals as individuals that can do the full spectrum. If you ever take a look at MITRE's attack model, where you have recon, then weaponization, the exploitation, so on and so forth. I see a penetration tester is everything from the exploit to the right is what a penetration tester does. Everything from the very far left, whereas recon, all the way to penetrate to the penetration piece, or the what we call right of the exploit. That is what a red teamer does. So it's full spectrum adversary operations, because obviously you have to know how to get out there, use publicly available resources, what we call OSINT, open source intelligence gathering, getting as much information about your specific target as possible, start going out there, start creating some weapons, either weaponizing email in the form of a spear phishing or a phishing campaign. You're creating all of these different things to stage up for the penetration test, because really when you look at the time that it takes to do everything, the information gathering part of it is so much longer. It takes weeks to get that information, where the actual penetration test can be anywhere between a couple of days to maybe a week.
Sure. Absolutely. But the entry point, how do they start learning the skill sets that make them either a pen tester or and I don't mean like, how do they learn the differentiated skill sets? I mean, where do they start if they're interested in going into the space?
Well, I mean, for parents that have aspiring penetration testers, just make sure that they're in the state of Texas 17 or older, so that they can be tried as an adult. I mean, and I use that joke lightheartedly, just because in my time of working with high school students, you give them a tool, you get them interested in this and whatnot, and then of course they go out and they hack the planet, and then you get a phone call from their parents, or you get apparently the parent got a phone call from their financial institution saying, we got a NICTO or an Nmap scan from your IP address. We would really appreciate it that you don't scan our network for this. And come to find out, it was their 15, 16-year-old kid that learned this from us. So, how to get into?
I'll even phrase it just a little differently. Okay, let's say help desk analyst, somebody who isn't really necessarily a systems person or somebody, but who has started their tech journey, has learned a little bit conceptually about the functions of each job because they take help desk calls, and has decided they want to get into either red teaming or pen testing, something that functions along the MITRE kill chain. What resource would you point them to first? That's a better way to ask the question.
So there are actually a lot of different resources out there. A couple that come to mind are Try Hack Me or Hack the Box. A lot of those have really good scenarios, and they break it down Barney style. I mean, they'll teach you, okay, this is what a Linux system is if you've never touched Linux in your entire life, and it will show you like how to do certain things on a Linux system, and then they'll eventually go into more vulnerability assessments, and then eventually writing an exploit, and then using that exploit against a vulnerability and whatnot. Those are two resources I can think of. There's another one out there called Metasploitable. If you've ever heard of a popular tool called Metasploit, there is I think it's a Windows 95 or Linux system that has a bunch of different vulnerabilities in it, and then you can use Metasploit against that to quote unquote pop the box.
I use Damn Vulnerable Web Server as well.
Yeah,
that's a reference point for folks.
Yeah, that's another good one, a fantastic one. Let's see here. What else would you get into? I had another one. It completely skipped my mind. One of the other really cool things that has recently come up is a lot of Raspberry Pi hacking. If you're not familiar with what a Raspberry Pi is, it's essentially a small little computer that has a bunch of different resources on it. It's got RAM, it's got a CPU, it's got an ARM-based CPU, it's got a network interface, it's got a couple of USB connectors in it. You can put a Wi-Fi thing in there and whatnot. And I've seen a lot of individuals create what they're called moles. Essentially, it's a Linux system that calls back to a server wherever you have it. So I know that there are some really good penetration testers that are doing some stuff with Raspberry Pis and actually having some really good results from that.
Fantastic.
Certification wise, if I was to, so I actually have one of these certifications, but I'm a huge fan of this organization. They're an Israeli-based company called Offensive Security. That name may sound familiar because they're actually the developer of Kali Linux. So they actually have a couple of really good programs, but one of the entry level program is their Offensive Security Certified Professional, and they really, of all the other training that I've been through, they really go into how to be a true red teamer. I mean, everything from OSINT collection all the way to weaponization, exploitation, and then executing your objectives on the penetration or the target network.
I like to jokingly call it the Kali Linux cert, but
Kali Linux cert. Well,
but it is definitely useful. What's that?
Back in the day, it used to be called Backtrack. So that's how far back I go.
Yeah, I was a Backtrack user too, and I don't think I think I used Kali once before. Once I moved into management, I stopped keyboard clacking, is what I call it, near as often. Yeah,
that's the sad thing, is that if you want to start making a lot more money and paying for much more expensive alcohol, then you have to go into management.
This is a fact, but here we are.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Although I do know from personal experience that you have kept your tech skills up way better than I've kept mine. Although I talk architecture just fine. I speak the language of architecture and business systems integration, whereas you still speak memory dump.
Well, but you know, the interesting thing about especially what I teach is you have to know what's going on in the industry. I would not be good to my students if I taught stuff from back in the day. And like case in point, the person who wrote the material before me, fantastic person, but they haven't had the time to update their materials, and I think that's one of the reasons why they hired me. Yeah, exactly. And so instead of teaching stuff from like where we've got memory images or hard drive images from a Windows 7 system, we now need to start going into much more up-to-date operating systems, maybe even sprinkle in a little bit of Linux and whatnot. So it keeps, when I learn this stuff, it keeps me fresh, which in turn keeps my students fresh. Like case in point, if you've never heard of a small, cute little tool called Velociraptor, if you don't have a tool that you can use for forensic artifact grabbing from a remote system, or even some threat hunting, I'd encourage you to take a look at Velociraptor. There is a high bar as far as what you have to do as far as learning it, but it is a fantastic tool out there. And so one of the things that we teach in our digital forensic analysis too is live forensic analysis on an uncompromised system. So going through logs, finding backdoors on a system, finding out what user executed those that backdoor, so on and so forth. So I think that's very important. And so needless to say, I sat down and learned Velociraptor for a couple of weeks and created a lab. And now my students are just like, this is the best lab I've done so far. And I understand why, because the first couple ones were like Windows registry and jump.
Ooh, have you made them do shell bags yet?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, Velociraptor is going to be way better if they've already done shell bags.
Yeah. So we try to focus on like what an artifact looks like and where to go get those artifacts at first, and do it the hard way, the real forensicator way, where you have to use a hex editor or do some I guess reverse engineering on that side, going based off of documentation, and then you get into the cool tools that do it all for you, and then you can just, all you got to do is go grab a cup of coffee while your system is chewing on it. So it's awesome.
Mm-hmm. What's one? I don't know if it still holds up or is it still in use at all. Scalpel. I used to use that for data recovery.
Scalpel, yeah. So Scalpel, I've used Scalpel and Foremost. So a lot of those are mainly data recovery software. So like case in point, my uncle thought I was a mastermind when I did this. So he comes with me with his camera, his digital camera. I was like, hey,
Yeah.
I pulled the memory card out and none of my pictures are there. So I pulled them off, or at least pulled the memory card out, and sure as shit, I mean, there's nothing on there at all. And so I ran it through Foremost, and of course, what Foremost does is it looks for it looks at the bit for bit information. It looks for headers, and it looks for footers, and based on that information, it will go ahead and carve out what we call data carving, pulls that information out, and then carves that out into whatever type of file it was, whether it was in this case, a PNG or a JPEG or Word document or a PDF, so on and so forth. So yeah, those are really good for data recovery. And actually, go ahead.
We're kind of diving into digital forensics, and so I want to give a little scaffolding for the audience real quick. You mentioned beta carving, but you didn't talk about carving. Can you talk about file carving and that real quick? What it means? Just a quick definition so that they know why it's called beta carving.
Yeah. So file carving is essentially when you're on a Windows system, taking in consideration like a Windows system, and you double click on a program, that's going to be an executable. Well, how does Windows know that it's an executable? Well, the really crappy way the Windows does it is that it looks at the extension, where a real operating system like Unix or Linux, it looks at what is called a file header. More in specific, it looks at the very first couple of bytes called a magic number, and that essentially tells the operating system what that file is, whether it's an executable, whether it's just a dump of data in some way, shape, or form, or if it's a image like a PNG or a JPEG or whatnot. And so, based off of that information, then as you start looking at the subsequent bytes in that file header, it's going to tell you things like how long that file is, what's the length of that file, where a footer, if the footer, a file footer, meaning the end of the file, where that may be. And so what what file carving does is effectively analyzing that, first of all, taking a look at that magic number or that file identifier and seeing what it is, and then based off of that, go look at the spec and take a look at the header, analyze that header, and then what you're doing is you're making a predictive analysis to find the end of that file, whether it's based off of a location of a footer or maybe even just the file length itself. And then you are effectively just carving out that information from that storage medium, whether it's a spinny disk or solid state drive or something else like that. So that's what file carving is. Just is recovering what appears to be a deleted file, or recovering a file from a system.
And it's the activity when you've heard people say, oh, well, when you delete a file, it's not really gone. It's the activity that makes that statement true.
And I got actually a funny story about that.
Lead the way.
So I was approached by actually my business partner at one point. Actually, he's still my business partner. And there was a case coming up where this person had made a statement that the company was doing something wrong. And so they wanted us to do a forensic investigation on the media, the thumb drive that this person brought in. And one of the very first things I always ask a lawyer is, did you guys do any analysis? Did you do anything to this? And they're just like, no, we took a forensic copy. We haven't done anything, which, by the way, that's a good thing. If you are a lawyer listening to this, or if you are somebody that's doing this type of work, forensic copies of everything is great. If you do not know how to do that, consult a professional. We'll help you out with that. But anyway, so as we got this and started doing our investigation, we found a lot of these deleted files, and we started recovering those deleted files. And so this person had made her statements about the company, and Come to find out, she stole a lot more information than what she led on to believe, which eventually turned into not a good time for her. So not only was her case kind of dismissed, but also she was facing some trouble, needless to say. So whatever you do, if you think that you're deleting files, well, I mean, unless you're Hillary Clinton and the whole little, what was that too? Bleacher bit or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. File your data can't be recovered by a professional. So bleach bit, that's what it's called.
Bleach bit. Yes. Also, if somebody says this is DOD level and finishes that sentence,
military grade encryption.
Yes, military grade encryption, DOD level destruction. Well, it is true that the military does have standards for things. They're often not actually that far off of the general industry standards. What they are, they're validated. That's the difference. If you wipe a disk 27 times, it is wiped.
Yep. Well, and I think like back in the day when we started this, I think that that we had a heavy reliance on the U.S. government, or at least the government in general. But as those government professionals have left for much greener pastures, they've created their own standards in which they've become industry standards in which they've made lots and lots of money from intellectual property. So, yeah.
I don't know anything about what you're talking about, a government person leaving government.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
It never happens. They all love their jobs and they stick with it.
I did love my job, but that's where that sentence ends. All right. So let's circle back to where I distracted us and go back to your original story points. I think we were just at the point in your personal story where you left the military, which is how I'm doing the segue. And we're starting to make your way into the private sector.
Actually, I was getting into the military. So
oh no!
This was right around the time when I had stopped with.
Fast forwarded in my head. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, you're taking our talk about yesterday and fast forwarding it. So, but yeah, no, this was. I had just finished my first job as a penetration tester, essentially a security auditor for e-voting systems. And because I was in the CyberCore program at the time, one of the requirements, so the government's paying for my master's degree, so I have to give them back some time. And so I became a DoD civilian. I went to go work for the United States Air Force, and got into the offensive side at first. I can't tell you anything about that, or else I have to kill you. But it was.
And with any luck, that would be a lot of people, because a lot of people will listen to this.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the offensive side, you know, the interesting thing about the offensive side is you can't be a good defender unless you know offensive techniques, and then vice versa. Just because as far as a defender is concerned, you need to know how these guys are getting into your network, and not just getting into your network, where are they going from there? So having that background in both sides is going to be very important. And so I was very, very fortunate to do that for the first couple of years of being in the Air Force. And then afterwards, I ended up going to the AFCERT, the Air Force Computer Emergency Response Team, also known as the 33rd Network Warfare Squadron. And so my job at the time was I was a section chief of the forensic intrusion analysis element or team. I had a group of about 10 guys that were under me, and a multi-million-dollar lab that we essentially pulled hard drives from various squadrons from all over the country, broke them up, and essentially performed our investigations, whether it was to help AFOSI. If you're not familiar with that term, it's the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. You probably heard of the term NCIS. They're the Air Force version of the Navy's NCIS. So
I was informed today that they have decided to drop the AF and they just go by OSI now, even when you're not inside.
I'm not surprised. I mean, it's like NCIS going by CIS now. So,
right.
I'm working in the AFCERT lab, and I've got this young lieutenant, very bold, very, very smart kid. His name's Matt Weeks, right? And at this time, we have just deployed this capability called In-Case Enterprise across, well, I would say, the vast majority of the Air Force network. And Matt is trying to figure out, how can we use this? What is the best way, instead of just using it for reactive forensic operations? How can we use this? Because it's an agent that is on all the systems in the network. So he started developing what they call in scripts, essentially scripts that could be leveraged by the agent. And he started pulling back information from all these different systems, like services that were installed and processes that were running. And right around this time when he was playing around with it, this was right before a major Pacific Theater exercise that we were about to participate in. And so as he's doing his analysis, he finds some interesting malware. And as he starts looking through everything, he realizes that it's a certain 3-letter agency's malware. And come to find out that they are the red team. They're the red team getting ready for this exercise. And so Matt tells me, and we tell our commander, and we eventually start putting together a plan. And actually, they started putting together a plan. And the operation was called Operation Botany Bay. If you're not familiar with Star Trek, I will just say that Botany Bay was a ship that carried a whole bunch of genetically modified humans that were actually, the reason why they were on that ship is because they tried to take over Earth. And so they were essentially exiled. So, and of course, we had a whole bunch of Star Trek nerds in our squadron at the time. So we called it Operation Botany Bay. And so we started putting together a list of all this malware, right? And I think it was 24 hours before StartX, or the start of the exercise, we schwacked the malware. All of it's gone. Every single one of it's done. And it really made these guys mad, to the point where they were actually reaching out to the Air Force Red Team and asking them if they had access into our network. So that's how interesting that situation goes. And ironically, I talked to a NSA Red Teamer today, a brand new guy, really super smart guy. And we were having a conversation about Botany Bay and whatnot. And he's just like, that story is not how they tell it at the agency.
Ooh, how do they tell it at the agency?
I'm like, please tell me how they say at the end. And apparently, their side of the story is, we installed out of scope, unauthorized software on our systems, and we used that software to find their malware and schwack it. And I'm
so in case is that out of scope software, right?
You were correct, sir.
I'm just validating this, making sure, as the independent third party who was not there, what I hear between the stories.
I mean, it's not like we didn't have an ATO being a approval to operate order that stated that In-Case was not only approved by the DoD, but we can use it across the entire agency. So I know for a fact that a lot of Red Teamers that day were really very mad about the situation. But at the end of the day, that itself, I mean, if you want to talk about the history or where the beginnings of threat hunting happened, it happened during that time in the AFCERT's forensic lab, while I was in charge. But it was a much smarter individual that was heading the fight. He was actually I think it was a second lieutenant at the time or first lieutenant at the time. So it just goes to show you that you don't have to be a captain or a major. You can be at the lowest of the totem pole, coming up with a great idea that just becomes a huge paradigm shift in the industry. And so, of course, that led to threat hunting and me leaving the Air Force into entrepreneurship and my next drink.
Cheers. That last comment you made about essentially rank not mattering when it comes to good ideas, that's actually something internally we hear a lot. at my company, because our president, Dave Tyson, he is constantly reminding all of us nobody has the market cornered on smart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing that I really didn't understand, especially when I started out in the Air Force as a civilian, um, was when you're young and you're fresh, you have new ideas, and you ask the question, why are we doing it that way? And the problem is that a lot of times the incumbent individuals or the people that are there, um, either they don't know that there's a better way of doing things, or maybe they just don't care. And so it takes people with new ideas, fresh ideas, and actually it doesn't matter how old you are. I mean, it's just really coming in with a different perspective and asking questions. And I think as a manager, you should not let the age barrier, the age gap, or even the experience gap affect how you think of people, because you'd be surprised. I've had some high school students that have asked me questions about the way we do things, and I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, we may need to fix that.
We may need to revisit that, right?
Revisit that, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, when you're hiring people, what do you hire for? If you could only pick one characteristic to hire for, what do you hire for?
The ability to learn, the ability to listen.
Same here. I'm looking for the keywords I look for in an interview, and this is like giving cheat codes out, so I need to make sure that I carefully adjust my approach from here on. But is the desire and ability to grow and learn.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the other thing about that is, as far as a manager is concerned, is you also have to be able to grow your people as well. Mm-hmm. Send them to training, send them to opportunities, take them out of their comfort zone and put them into things that they have no idea what they're doing, but hopefully they're going to fall flat on their face, but they are going to learn something.
The number one mistake so many organizations, not just managers, but organizations make, is not training their people because it costs money or it takes them away from work or whatever that reason is. The number one mistake that organizations make, and it is also one of the factors cited as the highest reason for leaving by high-tech professionals, is not training their people, not giving them the resources to continue to grow, because the good ones are all curious. Feed that curiosity. The other pet peeve I have, and then it's all yours, is the type of manager who is always hiring the person who will work for them instead of the person who will take their job. They don't want to hire anybody that could take their job, because then they'd be out of a job. No, if you hire the right people, they make you look so good you get a promotion, and then they get your job.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the other thing. I think that as a manager, one of the things that as a manager, as a leader, as a businessman or whatever, like, one of your jobs is to create a budget. And unfortunately, we live in a time where, especially in the commercial side, you want to work lean. You don't want to waste any money. But I think that it's doing a huge disservice to your people if you don't put training in there. If you don't make a line item for every specific person that you are going to give them X amount of thousands of dollars in training a year, by the way, I'm not talking about every 2 or 3 years, whatnot. It has to happen every year. And you don't have to send about Black Hat or DEF CON every year, because that's tens of thousands of dollars in hotel fees. And then, of course, they go to the trainings and other things like that. But there are other online based certifications. There are other things that they can absolutely do to keep those skills honed. And I think that to be a successful manager, to your point, is making sure that you put a line item in there for your people to get smart and to stay smart in the field. Otherwise, you're just going to run into a problem where they're going to get frustrated. They feel like they don't have a sense of accomplishment, and they're just going to move on.
Shout out to Jim Trevally, one of my old managers, who probably doesn't feel like he ever did anything for me, but actually set me up to success. Yeah. If I hadn't worked for Jim for the year I worked for Jim, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll shout out to Brian McNutt. He's actually one of my very first bosses at the 91st. He was a retired senior master sergeant that knew the importance of his people. And so one of the very first things I had no clue, I really had no clue that as an Air Force civilian or a DoD civilian, you can actually take the same training that the military officers take. And so he enrolled me in all of the correspondence courses and all the in-residence courses, the cyber courses that a lot of the airmen were taking. And then he also enrolled me in something called Squadron Officer School, which if you're familiar with the military, especially when you're either, it doesn't matter if you're an NCO or an officer, you have to go through what is called professional military education. So if you're like, let's say, for instance, you're an airman, you have to go to like non-commissioned officer school and senior non-commissioned officer school and so on and so forth. And this is so that you can make rank. Same applies to the officer side. You have to go to Squadron Officer School, then Air Command Staff College, then War College. Then there's other things that you can do on that time. So Brian was the first one that says, you know what, you need to go to Squadron Officer School, and I think you'll get a kick out of it. I think you're going to enjoy it. I will say the first day I didn't. And there's the reason for that, and we actually talked about this yesterday. The talk that I had was cybersecurity entrepreneurship, the journey that nobody wanted, and this kind of dovetails into this. Where the very first day I showed up to Squadron Officer School, I'm a cyber operator and a civilian, and there are I think of 15 other Air Force officers, all captains. And there's this one intel officer that hated the idea that I was there. She told me flat out in front of everybody, I think that you being here is a waste of time, is a waste of space, because I've got friends that are trying to make major, and this is the one thing that they're missing. And so, and I understood exactly where she was coming from because I was taking a spot, but I very quickly changed her perspective because unfortunately at that time, there was a very bad stigma that all civilians, all military civilians were worthless and just were there for a paycheck. And I definitely changed.
Dispelled her of that?
Well, and she actually when we graduated, she came to me and said, you know what, I apologize for my remarks. You definitely changed my perspective on Air Force civilians. So thank you for your time here. And I learned a lot from you, and I learned a lot from her too. I mean, it was definitely a mutual respect type of a situation. So, but yeah, it was Brian McNutt. Thank you very much for putting me on the right track.
Absolutely. Well, let's see what else. Back to your story. We are in the military now. We've done some fun things. Let's go ahead and fast forward because we've been talking for quite a while now.
Yeah, let's fast forward. So now entrepreneurship. I leave the Air Force, and so while I'm in the Air Force, there's two things going on actually. So I am working on a program. So at the time, actually, I should probably not say the organization, but I was working with a volunteer organization to help put together a cybersecurity education curriculum because they were very much involved in Cyber Patriot. But Cyber Patriot didn't really have a formalized curriculum. And so I wanted to put together something that would put these students on the right track for success. And so we created something called the Cyber Defense Training Academy. And so we actually had a week-long activity during the summer where all these kids from all over the nation would come down to the 24th Air Force and learn cyber from the professionals. And that was, it was a fantastic program. It ran all the way up until 2019. We taught over 500 kids and a handful of adults, and it was overall a fantastic idea. So that was one thing that I was doing at the time. And so I couldn't leave the Air Force immediately. But the other thing that was going on is an individual by the name of Christopher Garrett. He was the defensive counter cyber operator team lead, which for those who don't know what that is essentially he's the hunt team. And so he proposed to the Air Force, we need a platform that kind of automates a lot of the hunting process, because what we were finding is the airmen that were coming on board, it was going to take us anywhere between 6 months to almost a year to get them trained on how to do this correctly.
Sure.
And when we have an airman, we probably were only going to get them for anywhere between 2 and 3 years. A lot of times it's only going to be 2 years. So that's a huge chunk of time for us losing them. So Chris had recommended to the Air Force that we create a platform to help streamline a lot of those processes. And we were told to pound sand. Chris then said, you know what, I'm going to get out. I'm going to start a company, and then I'm going to create a threat hunting appliance or threat hunting platform. And so him and Russ Morris created InfoSight. And we were one of the first hunt products out there. Unfortunately, we didn't have a really good marketing team or a lot of finances. So we ran into a lot of snags along the way. But I actually came on board. So I think they started the company in like May or June, and then I came on in November. And my primary responsibility was cyber services. So install, configure, perform the assessments, bring back the information, make the tool better, so on and so forth. I was also a developer and a network architect. And I mean, if you get into entrepreneurship, just understand that you're going to be taking on a lot of different roles, not just your primary role. So also taking consideration that when you become an entrepreneur, you're going to take a pay cut. So everybody who's making all those insert responders and friends of yours that are making $150,000, $200,000 a year, yeah, you may not be making anything close to that. So just keep that in mind. It's called risk. That's the reason why people go into entrepreneurship, is they're hoping to make that money, but there is a significant amount of risk involved for it. So, but so we started InfoSight. Chris and Russ got the company off the ground, and I helped them with just finding people and getting things going. And then in 2016, we ran out of money. And this is just one of those things that happens, is that you go out for venture capital, you may get some, and just depending on the market, depending on your sales and whatnot, you run out of money. And that's exactly what we did. But the other thing,
I'll throw in a tidbit right there. And that is that Y Combinator says that the number one issue that causes their startups that they fund to go out of business is exactly that. They run out of money. And the number one reason, you want to guess the number one reason they run out of money?
Salaries. They give people too high of a salary.
They hire too many people, actually.
Okay, yeah.
They hire too many people because Y Combinator and lots of VCs, not just Y Combinator, but Y Combinator is where the stat came from. They typically they're aware of that one guy who's going to pay himself $1 million because he thinks he's worth it, and then pay everybody else normal salaries, or pay all of his friends a lot of money, and then the money's gone. But what happens is they are so convinced of their greatness that they expand so fast and so big that they expand beyond the ramp that their runway gave them.
Yep.
And so they run out of cash and they fall off the cliff.
Yeah, and the other ones I've heard were just horrible mismanagement of funding. I mean, like case in point, there was my partner actually told me this story where he'd actually had to come in and help this individual out, where he had gotten a bunch of money from I don't know if it's a contract or venture capital or whatnot, but this guy decides to go buy himself and his wife brand new Jaguars. And then he ran out of money, and he was wondering, well, I mean, I'm about to lose my company. What do I do? And so my partner comes in and says, go sell your Jaguars. I mean, you get that money back. I mean, even though you're not going to get all of it back, but and so he turned him around, and luckily he was able to make a successful business out of it. But the other thing, I think one of the things that we had a hard time with is we had an identity crisis. So when you get into entrepreneurship, especially when you're trying to go for funding, one of the very first things that the guys across the boardroom table are going to ask you is, what kind of company are you? Are you going to be creating a product? Are you going to be selling a product? Or are you going to be selling services? And the reason for that is the multiplier, the return on the investment. For a product company, the return on the investment is much higher than a services company because you're paying for intellectual property, you're paying for those patents, you're paying for those things that are going to have long-term returns. Where services are wham bam thank you ma'am. I mean, you go in, do an assessment, and you're done, unless you have recurring revenue or recurring services. But even then, you run into a problem where some of your customers may say, well, we're done with you and we're moving on to somebody else. And so a lot of times when a company is being bought by another company, and maybe in a merger and acquisition or whatnot, if it's a services company, chances are all you're doing is you're hiring the cream of the crop and maybe even purchasing the Rolodex, and everybody else is out. Everybody else is done. We're a product company. It's all intellectual property. So we had to make, as InfoSight, we had to make a decision, which ultimately Chris and Russ said, we're going to be a product company. We're going to create this platform, and we're going to sell it to people, not just companies that want this capability, but also to partners who want to do assessments, whether it's short-term assessments or long-term assessments. And so that's what we ended up doing. So I left the company in 2016 and created Coherent CYBER, and that's exactly what we've been doing today is threat assessments and incident response, so on and so forth.
Well, focus is another one of the things that a lot of the articles, a lot of the literature too, not just articles, but research says that companies have to do. They have to focus. They have to know, like you said, who you are, what kind of company you are. And the valuation of companies is a really interesting thing that is definitely, we only have up to 45 minutes left, and we don't have time for that conversation. We do not have time. That's a different channel, right? That's not really a cybersecurity thing, except that it does impact a lot of cybersecurity companies because there's a lot of cybersecurity startups. And so wading into the space is, well, it's a risk. You already highlighted it, right? And it's amazing to me how many people seem to not understand that it is a risk, even though the entire profession of cybersecurity and information security is risk management.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that you brought up a very good point that there are a lot of cybersecurity startups. I mean, and I would almost venture to say that the market is saturated. It is so saturated with either EDR companies or hunt companies or somebody else that has the latest and greatest idea that they're going to try to pitch to everybody. And what we're seeing now, especially in the VC side, the venture capital side, is they know what to ask for, and they know what is snake oil versus what's going to be a viable product. And if I'm probably going to regret saying this at this point in time, but I mean, if anybody have ever asked me if I'm going to create or start another company, I would probably say not in cybersecurity, probably somewhere else, but maybe I don't know, pastry baking or
let me save you from that. I would say not in the current market.
Yeah, I would definitely say not in the current market. So we had found, especially at Coherent CYBER, we had found that a lot of our target market, so this is commercial, small, medium, even enterprise businesses, they really don't care about security. It's one of those things where they don't see a very good return on the investment, so they don't do it. However, reactive. I mean, when they all of a sudden they've got a ransomware screen in front of them, now all of a sudden they're breaking the glass, they're getting the fire hydrant, they're picking up the red phone, they're calling their friends, like, who do you know can help us with this? And so that's where we found that a lot of the good business is coming from, is the incident response and the forensics side.
Yeah, but that's kind of lumpy. And I will also,
I'm correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm laughing a little because that's exactly how we know each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day. It has been many years now.
Has it been?
It
This
has.
was COVID, yeah. So we
Yeah.
met right around COVID time, and that was
Near
and
the
I
beginning of
don't
COVID. That
even know
was,
how the hell we ended up getting into that same office with all those people right around the start of COVID. So that was
yeah.
so. So Andy probably won't say this, but I can definitely say it. So Andy and I met on a case. We were on an IR case, and at the time he was a very influential person in the state of Texas, and I had no idea who this guy was, and on top of that, I had no idea who I was going to call for some of the resources that we needed for this specific case. And luckily, Andy was there to wrangle a lot of different agencies and a lot of different organizations to come in and get these people cleaned up and at least put us on the right track, so that at least I could do the investigation, write the report, and say, all right, this is what happened. Peace. So yeah.
You're right. I wasn't going to say any of that.
I tried to mask a lot of the details of that one, so because I'm pretty sure I'm still under NDA somewhere. So
I almost certainly am. Yes.
yeah,
Like probably lifetime. But if you read the news well, it's a case you've heard of.
yeah, no, yeah, exactly. So you just take a look at the time period, and so no, it's you're correct as far as the work is concerned, because unfortunately the work is very spotty. You're waiting for somebody to get popped. You're waiting for somebody to get compromised, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to happen right before a holiday weekend or a just a weekend period.
It can be very difficult to have plans when you work in incident response. But I want to circle back, actually, because we could burn that house down, and maybe I just need to have you back and we just focus on incident response, because I know we can talk about that for a long time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But you said something about businesses and cybersecurity not being worth it. And I had another conversation just earlier today that you weren't privy to that focused around that same thing. And my comment back, and I even wrote it down because it's going to be a LinkedIn post later, was that a whole lot of folks, it's really, really easy to come back and say, why weren't you doing it? Why were you not cyber secure? And it's so easy to point fingers after the incident by every single person around, right? The government will say, you should have been doing this. Where was your bare minimum? California themselves, right? In California, since 2016, I think it was, the established minimum standard for minimum cyber due diligence is to achieve, air quotes, the CIS top 20. It was still the top 20 back then, not the 18 that it is today. And the thing that all of that discussion, all of that finger pointing, and all of that easy Monday morning quarterbacking does is it neglects the obvious thing that companies, smaller companies especially, up to mid-market, operate at risk to begin with.
Yep.
They're able to take risks. They are startups. They are startups because they are taking a risk. That's that entrepreneurship principle you already mentioned. And so here we are wagging our fingers at folks for doing the thing that they are in the specific sector to do, right? They operate at risk because they are hoping for big gains.
Yeah.
Now, it's also okay for us to say, and you lose. But that's not the same discussion as saying, why isn't everybody doing this? While at the same time, the solutions that solve the problems they're facing cost tens, if not hundreds of hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars.
Yeah, like look at Costa Rica. I mean, Costa Rica just got popped, and their entire government, which I mean, the Conti ransomware guys are saying that we're trying to overthrow your government. So give us, actually, at first they said give us 10 million, and then now that since I guess because the United States government is getting involved, or we're helping them or something, or Biden had said something about this whole situation, that now they've upped the ransom to $20 million. So I mean, this is an unfortunate thing about the industry. But I would one thing I would mention here about the whole finger pointing and whatnot is that's counterproductive. This whole pointing fingers of why weren't you doing this, and why weren't you doing this right, and whatnot. So going back to our talk yesterday, one of my lessons learned was failure is an option. I mean, you're going to fall flat on your face. You're going to have things like this that come up, and then it's whether you learn from it or not. Now, the point where you need to start pointing fingers is if it happens again. I mean, if you get popped with ransomware, and you end up having to spend $50,000 in IR recovery, which is, by the way, that's cheap compared to some we've dealt with. That's an unfortunate thing, but that is an operating cost. And so, but 2 weeks later, or a month later, or a year later, you get popped by more ransomware. Somebody needs to be fired.
We had the CVE chat right up front, right? We talked about how many CVEs there were in the past and what. So there's always going to be a new discovered vulnerability. And that new discovered vulnerability is not something you can necessarily hold somebody accountable for in the past. And if you get popped before a patch is even available for that thing, okay, cool. But make sure all those other holes were buttoned up too. Make sure the visibility you didn't have at the time you now had, and you responded to it faster. You had a plan, you knew how to react, and and you had a recovery plan. That's another thing. That's a fundamental for ransomware, right? Yeah. We could do incident response and ransomware as another episode, because I know you know those things too.
So many different things that we can talk about, though.
There are. We've worked together though, so
I'll have to go and look at my NDAs and see what I can and cannot talk about.
We just need to not name names. It's fine.
There is that. We can use pseudonyms or different agencies, especially the ones we don't.
We can just talk.
So yeah, I was working for the CIA at this one time, and yeah.
I usually don't go after them.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't spy on you domestically, so.
Oh, I've heard.
Yeah, I mean that's outside of their charter, right? I mean they're part of the State Department, so they go spy somewhere else, not domestically. That's
nobody ever went outside their charter. Nobody has ever done anything that was just a little outside your charter to make sure the mission happens. That never happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But no, I don't know. It's cybersecurity is one of those fields where everybody wants to get into it, and good for you. I mean, we're at a deficit. We need really good people, but I also would think that, or I would also say that we don't need any more products. We don't need any more snake oil. If you have a great idea, go look at the market and see if somebody else is doing it. And if you think that they suck, then go talk to them about it and to make it better. Don't go out and build your own thing, because all you're doing is you're wasting investor time and money, and your own time and money. So I don't know. I mean, I'm about to start another company, but it's more of an education company. So we're splitting off Coherent CYBER. We're making Coherent CYBER education. And our focus in this case is going to be K through 12, or at least 9 through 12 education in cybersecurity. So we're going to be teaching a lot of security concepts, forensics, advanced networking, and eventually getting into red team stuff when they're in their senior year in high school and whatnot. So hopefully what we're targeting is we're trying to get them to a Security Plus certification, so that when they get out, they can get a really good job making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year just right out of high school. So
let's close on that piece. Let's talk about salaries, because we've been talking now for over an hour. So that's going to be a long podcast for people to listen to. Let's talk about salaries. So you mentioned, and I agree with your range, right? Coming in with a Security Plus and working in security, you can expect a salary of between $40,000 and $70,000. Degrees for some companies matter, for other companies don't in that particular space, right? And that depends. I don't think you can rely on your degree to necessarily increase your worth on day one entering the job market. But there's a lot of people out there that heard those numbers and said 40 to 70, that's so low. Cybersecurity, you can just practically mint your own salary. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, that's not the case whatsoever. I really hate to say this, but even the United States government has kind of inflated a lot of these salaries. And it's one of the reasons why they had a mass exodus of very highly qualified individuals. I mean, I distinctly remember seeing some airmen that either worked for me or I worked with them, and they were going through some really good DoD training. I'm talking like, these are the individuals that were hacking into other people's networks and stealing data. And I'm talking like other countries and whatnot. So, but really, really, really good training. I mean, you're talking about $250,000 to almost $500,000 in training alone. And these kids would work in that field for maybe 1 or 2 years, and they would get out, and they would end up making some ridiculous amount of money, like somewhere in between 120,000 all the way to $180,000 a year. And we saw the same thing with clear defense contractors, where what they were doing is they were waiting for a lot of these airmen, waiting for their enlistments to be up, because they knew that they had a security clearance, and they went ahead and told them, hey, look, you're right now, you're a senior airman, you're probably making like $28,000 a year, $30,000 a year, not to take in consideration the benefits that you're getting from the government and whatnot. We're going to pay you $70,000 a year, or we're going to pay you $100,000 a year. What do you think about that? And of course, they immediately jump on that. And so I think really some places it is definitely inflated. So I mean, if you're in San Antonio, Texas, which I'm in San Antonio, Texas, if your starting cybersecurity salary is $100,000, I'm shocked. I would be very shocked. I would definitely say that in the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 range as a starting a cybersecurity professional, that's right around. I mean, that's better than the cost of living here. That's better than a lot of what other people are making. Now, if we were in Hawaii, or if you're in DC, then yes, I can definitely see like an $80,000 salary, or even close to $100,000 salary, just because you have to you have to make enough to live in those areas. But then it comes back to our original discussion about specialization. Now, if you want to start getting smarter, if you want to start getting a lot more money, then you have to get smarter. And so that means you're going to have to specialize. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to get a degree, because quite frankly, so I'm going to say this, at one point in time, I never thought I was going to say this myself. You don't need to have a degree in this. Okay. You can just go get a certification, get a decent salary, and then go work for a company that will pay for your degree. Right. I mean, a lot of kids, didn't have the option of going to or paying for college. So what do? They go into the military and they get a GI Bill, right? Well, the same applies here. There are a lot of companies that if you are talented, they will pay for you to get your degree. So, I mean, I had the United States government paid for my master's degree. So, but you don't need a degree to get into this. You don't need a degree to be successful in this. Now, if you want to go become a manager, or if you want to take on like an executive spot, then yeah, you are probably going to need a bachelor's or even a master's, maybe an MBA or something. But vocations are definitely a thing. I mean, when you look at other countries like Germany and Sweden and whatnot, they put a huge emphasis on vocations. I mean, there's only a small fraction of individuals go to a 4-year institution and get a degree, where a lot of individuals are effectively getting a vocation, becoming an EMT, becoming a firefighter, becoming a helicopter pilot, or a plumber or whatnot. I mean, hell, I know plumbers in the United States that make well over 6 figures a year. So it's degrees.
But most of those plumbers spent the time to go through their apprentice and journeyman and got to where they are. It takes work. And cybersecurity, while it seems like the magic bullet and the easy button to a 6-figure salary, it is absolutely the path to a 6-figure salary. It's not necessarily the easy button. There's a lot of work.
There is. And that goes back to another piece of our discussion, where you need to be able to learn. You need to have the mentality of you continuing to learn. If you think that you're going to walk into, let's say, for instance, Lockheed Martin or a JP Morgan and whatnot, and say, I'm here, I've got this job now, I don't have to do anything else, I just have to get my on-the-job training done, get my probationary period done, and then I'm going to be at this job forever. You got the wrong mentality. And me personally, I would not hire a person like that if that was the case, or if I felt like that was going to be the case. I want my people to grow with the company and become successful later on down the line.
100%, absolutely. And please keep in mind, neither of us said that a 6-figure salary is out of reach, and there are geographic and cost of living constraints and considerations that mediate these salaries, right? The cost of living in Austin, New York, and the Bay Area are significantly higher than they are even in San Antonio, which is only an hour and a half from Austin, right?
Yeah, and you know, and one other thing that I definitely think is also inflated is experience, or at least the expectation of experience. I mean, I see a lot of things on Twitter. Twitter's such a cesspool, but that's a whole nother story. But I see a lot of postings from cybersecurity professionals that are looking at Indeed, or it's not monster.com anymore. They're just some of the places that are saying we need cybersecurity professionals. Okay, this is an entry level position. We expect you to have a 4-year degree, 10 years experience, 5 years in container development. I mean, just some inflated, ridiculous amount of experience for an entry level position, and you've got to, you just have to sit down thinking, who's writing this stuff?
Absolutely. I saw a job posting the other day highlighted on Twitter, the cesspool, and it highlighted years of experience required in a given technology. And then it had a second picture, which was a Google result of when the technology was invented. And the invention of the technology for which 10 years of experience was required was 4 years prior to the job posting.
Yeah, it's like container development. Well, containers have only been around for, or at least mainstream, been around for a short period of time. And then what you're telling me that I have to have 15 years of Docker experience when Docker hasn't even been around that long? Come on, guys, seriously, it's crazy.
It happens way, way too often.
Well, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that probably the manager is not writing it. It's probably an HR firm or an HR section that is looking at what they need. And oh, by the way, all of those entry level positions require a CISSP, which, if you're not familiar with that, it is the ISC squared's Certified Information Systems Certified Security Professional.
Security professional, yeah.
Security professional. And so, and to give you kind of an idea of this certification in Europe, if you have this certification, they consider that a master's degree. So it's a very well respected certification. And the fact that somebody is asking for that certification in an entry-level position is absolutely asinine.
It also requires 5 years of professional experience. Don't forget that. It requires 5 years of professional experience to even apply.
Correct.
For certification. So does the CISM. So does the CRISC. So do so many of the other senior level certifications. And to think that somebody should have those as an entry level position is just divorced from reality, or you're literally asking people to commit fraud on their applications to be able to get a job.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to make one shameless plug in this, continuing on with this whole certification thing. And I want to talk about the education side. One of the things that we are absolutely running into right now is a lot of school districts has this emphasis on certifications and cyber certifications. And I'm hoping that some of these guys are listening to this podcast. But one of the things that we're running into is a lot of these school districts are giving schools additional money for the certifications that their students are taking. And so, like case in point, when we go and pitch our product to a school district, they're like, okay, what certifications do you offer? Well, we don't offer a certification until the end, or until senior year, which is the Security Plus certification. Well, that doesn't work for us. We have to have at least 4 certifications along the way. For all 4 years, we have to have at least 1 certification every year. And we ask them, well, so what's the point of that? It's because we get money. We get money for every certification that a student gets. And I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. But you do understand that a lot of these certifications have a shelf life. A lot of these certifications ends in 2-3 years, and you have to re-up for it, whether it's a continuing professional education or whatnot. You have to pay for this. So are you, as a district, willing to pay for this? Well, no, we're not willing to pay for that. So then why are you doing this then? What is the emphasis on the certifications? And what we're finding is that what these schools are going to now, because even though the school districts or even TEA says, here are the requirements, it's ultimately led to the teachers and the schools to come up with the curriculum and everything else to that fact. And so we find that a lot of these teachers are using programs like Sure to Pass or these programs that essentially give all the student all the things that they need to do to pass the certification, but really don't give them enough information to be successful in the field. And so
we talked about those fundamentals early on, like an hour ago now. We talked about those fundamentals, and they are critical to that success.
Yeah, and it's setting ourselves up for failure if we're teaching our kids the basics to pass a certification. And then, I mean, hell, I mean, you're going to have educators talk about standardized testing the same way as well. But I mean, when we're looking at a vocation, I mean, if I'm getting a student to do the very bare minimum on a certification, and they come in and they start working for me, and come to find out that they don't have those fundamentals, then you're not doing your job. You're not setting your kid up for success, and you're not setting up the local businesses that need these people up for success either.
And there's a whole lot of places across the country where the local population is likely to live, wants to stay in that same small town or one of the rural small towns surrounding that rural small town. They want to stay there. They're from that area. West Texas is known for people live, grow up, get educated, and grow old and die in West Texas. But what we don't have is a good pipeline to build the capability and capacity that is required to meet the evolving modern cybersecurity and even just IT needs of modern businesses that try to sprout up and then often fail because they don't have the access to the talent pool they need, and they can't afford to import it. And even if they could, they can't get those people to stay because people who aren't from West Texas don't want to stay in West Texas quite frequently. People who aren't from the deep woods of East Texas don't want to stay in the deep woods of East Texas. And that is the same. There is a region like that in every single state. There's a mindset like that in every single state. So figuring out how to grow this, you and I are very Texas centric because we're from and in Texas, but the mindset is the same across an area in every state. And we need to figure out how to provide them, how to teach them to fish, kind of, right?
Well, and the other interesting thing that I had no idea about until I became an entrepreneur is this concept of economic development and workforce development. I mean, when you're in, like, for me, I'm in San Antonio. When you have individuals that have high paying jobs, they're spending that money locally. Okay. And so what does that mean? That means that your economy is booming, and things are doing. So when you have, like, let's say, for instance, if you've got high school students that are coming out making 50, 60,000 a year, now working remote jobs because of COVID, we now have this great thing called remote work. Now working remote jobs, but they're still making $70,000 a year in their current environment, and then they're spending that money. They're buying cars, they're buying clothes, they're buying, or in our case, alcohol, and so your economy is doing well. So if we can find the economic developments corporations or centers that know about workforce development and that can take some of that money and put it into vocational programs like that, it's ultimately going to make your local economy better.
100%. Well, I think we are definitely past the normal listening length of the average listener. So we might need to cut this up into 2 episodes. But even if we don't, it is time to wrap up. So, Jacob, thank you so much for joining me. Where can the guests find you?
They can definitely find me at www.coherentcyber.com. We've got a website with all of our services on there. You can also find me on Twitter, J_Stauffer. That's STAU, F as in Foxtrot, ER. I'm at J_Stauffer on the Twitters.
Also known as the cesspool, because we covered that.
Also known as a cesspool. And I don't use Facebook. So if you find me on Facebook, you can actually find me on LinkedIn as well under Jacob.Stauffer. But if you try to get me on Facebook, I'm going to ignore you because I think that's even worse than Twitter. But
yeah, Facebook is for sharing baby pictures with my family in private groups. That's about the only thing. And the marketplace. I'm not going to lie. It has replaced Craigslist for me, for better or for worse.
This is true. I mean, less chance of getting stabbed.
Slightly, only slightly. Because I don't think the quality control is as tight as it was when they first started it, because, it's hard to say no to additional air quotes opportunities.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we covered a whole lot of ground. We went from war stories to salaries to the MITRE attack model and OSINT to lots of forensics tools. Foremost, hack.me as a platform where you can go to learn. Foremost is a tool, but hack.me is a platform. Hack the Box, Metasploit. We learned what a NICTO scan is if people were paying attention. And Velociraptor. We talked about offensive security. We talked about even that the job of a manager is to build a budget. And so I think we covered a lot of ground. We talked about education, qualifications, entry-level jobs, and how people are getting that wrong. So there's a little something for everybody in this episode. Thank you so much for that. So with that, I'm Apollo CISO, Andy Bennett. This has been Cybersecurity Distilled. You can find us at apollo-is.com or on social media. We are on LinkedIn, and we are also on Facebook, but that's just because, that's a thing. We have a YouTube channel where you can probably check this and other things out, and just search for Apollo Information Systems to go check us out there. Until next time, raise a glass to preparedness. Cheers, my friend.
Cheers.
Vigilance and resilience.